Okay, hello everyone. So this lecture will be on Thailand. Okay, this will be a pretty short one. Okay, because I just want to focus on the Thai Muslims, right? So once again, we look before you start the case study proper, right? It's always good to look at like the context, okay, of the country in order to understand what are some of the inherent and foundational problems lah. Okay, that would make minority-majority relations challenging and problematic. So again, in Thailand, we are multi-ethnic, okay, although relatively homogeneous in terms of religion. Okay, there are four main groups that we observe in Thailand. Okay, the central Thai would be the majority group, right? The rest would be the minority groups. Okay, then the central Thai would be where Bangkok would be. Okay, and they would dominate the country politically, culturally, economically, socially. So basically, you know, the Thai identity, right, was very much premised upon the central Thai identity. All right, so therefore is the rest are just expected to like just follow. Okay, so for example, okay, by law, the Central Thai dialect, okay, is known as the whatever they study in school, so it's become the national language kind of thing. All right, and all who aspired to be the civil service, okay, were expected to master Central Thai language. Yep. Okay, so you can see that, you know, this Thailand, okay, and yeah, there are a lot of you know, minority groups. Okay, but actually, right, with regards to minority relations, especially in Chiang Mai, in northern Thailand, right, it's actually quite okay one. It's quite positive. Okay, I think it's because of Sarit's positive policy of you know, development, okay, in trying to develop these areas, okay, and also maybe they share the same religion, so maybe they have something in common, okay, with the central Thai people. Okay, but the restive area, right, would be southern Thailand, because they are the Muslims, okay, and maybe because fundamentally they share a different religion, so it's very awkward for a Buddhist dominated government, right, to impose an identity, right, on the Thai Muslim minority. Okay, so that's why you get a lot of like clashes. All right, so that's why, you know, for Thailand, right, you just focus on Thai Muslims, because I'm aware that with the rest of the other ethnic groups, right, it's actually quite positive, meaning the other minority groups, they do not rise up in rebellion or anything. There's no like separatist movement there. Okay, so let's look at in the Thai Muslim case study. Okay, so generally some of the main obstacles, all right, with regards to you know, government's inability to assimilate minority groups, right? Okay, would be you know, when there are social and economic reforms, they are not well implemented. Okay, there's corruption, and there's also like administrative neglect. All right, so these are the some of the ways or some of the obstacles, okay, that will make implementation of the developmentalism or policies to assimilate the minorities, right, problematic. Okay, with regards to the Thailand case study, basically the central Thai people, right, they do not really understand perhaps, you know, the cultural norms, the values of people who are not who they are of like the other groups, okay, especially the Thai Muslims. Okay, so that's why sometimes when they are being appointed to these areas, okay, they will mishandle local situation. Okay, sometimes they will also impose reforms, all right, without full consideration on how it will actually impact the locals, because they don't really care. They think that they are very superior. Okay, so they're just there to like, you know, impose their own superior attitudes and policies on the minority groups. Okay, so there's this issue about administrative neglect. Okay, so this is southern Thailand. All right, so this would be the main provinces. Okay, in southern in the southern, let me got southern Thailand. Now, historically, okay, in southern Thailand, right, they actually share more in common with the four northern Malay states, okay, of Malaysia, okay, because they actually like related by marriage and by kinship or whatever lah. Okay, so in the pre-colonial period, right, they're actually like, you know, just Malay kingdoms. All right. However, because of colonial legacies, okay, there's this Bangkok Treaty of 1909, okay, between the British and Thailand. All right. The British actually allowed Thailand, okay, to formalize their control over these four Malay kingdoms, all right, and therefore they became part of Thailand, you know, officially. Okay, and in return, Thailand relinquished its claims on Kedah, Kelantan, Perlis, and Terengganu. Okay, but actually, they're actually, you know, the same. Okay, just that in the pre-colonial period, right, Thailand will be somewhat like the dominant so called kingdom, okay, all right, in Southeast Asia. So therefore, the other Malay states, right, they will actually, be considered like vassal states, okay, of this Thai kingdom, okay. And so therefore, the Thai kingdom would traditionally offer protection over these Malay states, okay. But when the British came along, they wanted boundaries, all right. They wanted to be clear what's mine and what's yours, okay. So that's why, in order to be fair, okay, they needed the Thai king, okay, to actually make a decision, okay. There are 8 states here, you cannot take all of them, okay, I need some of them, right. So therefore, in this Bangkok Treaty, okay, it was agreed that the Patani, Narathiwat, Songkhla, and Satun Yala, okay, so they would, belong to Thailand, all right, whereas Thailand would allow these 4 northern Malay states to be part of Malaya, okay, British Malaya, okay. So that's where we have the genesis or the roots of the problems lah, okay, of what's currently happening in southern Thailand, okay, because traditionally they are really not part of Thailand, in like officially kind of thing, okay. The Bangkok government expect the Thai Muslims to become Thai in all aspects except religion. So obviously there's no forced conversion, okay, they're still allowed to practice their religion, all right, but in all other things, okay, they're expected to follow the central Thai identity. Okay, however, Thai Muslims saw religion as part of their identity, so it's very hard to divorce, language, with religion, for example, or cultural practices with religion, or even things like names. Okay, so like for example, Thai Muslims, right? They actually have 2 names. They have their Muslim names, okay, but they're also expected to have Thai names. Okay, so therefore it's very awkward. Like, you have like 2 names, and therefore you're supposed to you technically have 2 identities, but actually, in order for you to really be affiliated to the country, you should only have one. So when you have this kind of like conflicting identities, right, there'll be one would eventually, struggle over the other, and then there will definitely be conflict. Okay. So let's look at the specific policies, all right, that would lead to conflict. Okay, and just now in the earlier lecture I mentioned that, for language and education, right, we always use Thailand because it's very well developed. Okay, so let's look at how. Okay, so basically let's look at language. Usually the Thai government's attempts to use language to assimilate the minorities, right, is done through education. It's done through the schools. Okay, so we'll see how that happens. Now, language carries symbolic identity with the Islam religion for the Thai Muslims. Okay, because they would use, for example, maybe the Jari language, okay, to learn from their own religious texts, for example. Okay, so that's why to them identifying with their own language, okay, is integral to the practice of their religion and therefore their identity. Okay, however, what the government did, right, was that they initiated a policy of assimilation through education. Okay, so therefore they wanted to stress the Thai language, okay, in Islamic schools, okay, in southern Thailand. Right, so as early as 1921, okay, there was a Primary Education Act, but basically there were a lot of resistance, okay, from the southern Muslims. Okay, so they resist so much so that there were actually riots that broke out. All right, the Malays regard the law as the central Thailand or the central government, right, imposing their identity on them, okay, and they saw it as undermining the Malay language and Islam. All right, in 1936 there was a compulsory national education program, okay, but then again it was not well received, okay, amongst the Thai Muslims. Okay, so when Sarit took over, right, he wanted to do something more drastic, okay, in order to again make a third attempt, all right, to impose education policies, okay, on the Thai Muslims. So actually, right, in your case studies, maybe you don't have time to write all these 3 attempts because the first 2 attempts failed. Okay, these 2 attempts failed, 1921, 1936. So actually, right, when you study, right, you can just focus on this 1961 one because this is the most important one. Okay, this is the one that will eventually lead to the separatist movement actually. So let's look at what Sarit did. Okay, in 1961, he created a program of educational improvement, all right, which was aimed at transforming the Pondok. So basically, Pondoks would be like religious schools, okay, the kind of informal religious schools, okay, into private schools. Okay, so wanting to transform them into like modern schools. Okay, and they wanted to, and in return for some state funding, right? Okay, they wanted to force the Pondoks, all right, to teach like NE stuff, okay, and the Thai language, all right. so we have evidence, okay, so there are 537 pawn dogs, okay. By 1971, 10 years later, 109 were closed, okay, because they refused to register and comply with the government's decrees, okay. So therefore, Thai Muslims were very angry, okay. They said that the government was trying to like brainwash their children, all right, inculcate them with values, because the government wanted to force the pawn dogs to teach like NE stuff, okay, which might be based on Central Thai identity, and Central Thai identity is primarily like Buddhist identity, right? Okay, so obviously the Thai Muslims were very unhappy. Okay, so therefore there's a lot of resentment. Okay, and so say that the Thai language is part of Buddhist religion, so we cannot really force pawn dogs to teach Thai language. Okay, it's very unnatural. Okay, so therefore there were a lot of resistance, unhappiness kind of thing. Okay, another policy, okay, will be government sponsored migration. So therefore in Thailand we also have transmigration. All right, so therefore the policy of encouraging Buddhist Thais, all right, almost 100,000 of them, to migrate to the southern districts. Okay, and again they even receive land. Okay, so later on actually, even though there were some like economic policy reforms, you know, in southern Thailand, right, in order to try and, you know, raise a standard of living, a lot of times the people who benefited from these programs, right, they were the Buddhists, okay, who migrated there. Okay, the Buddhist Thais who migrated there simply because they were the majority groups. Okay, so the local leaders there, right, the administrators there, they kind of like have like practice favoritism or something, or these majority groups, they had easier access, all right, to these new resources, to these new initiatives. Okay, so yeah, so like for example, economic underdevelopment. So therefore, during the development decade, during Sarit, right, even though there were some agricultural reforms, right, a lot of times it was mostly the people who benefited, right, would mostly be the Buddhist Thais and Chinese. The Muslim farmers didn't really take them up, primarily because they were not given the opportunity because of administrative neglect, and also the Muslim farmers themselves, they also like have lack of trust, all right, with the local officials, okay, with local administrators who were sent, you know, by the central government. So therefore, you know, there was this, they regarded these officials as like foreigners or like outsiders. Okay, so that's why the Muslims themselves, they also did not benefit from attempts to like, you know, reform them or to give them economic benefits. Okay, so all these left the Muslims feeling that the government had overlooked their needs, and then they feel that they are discriminated against, they are being marginalized. Okay, so a lot of the officials posted there, okay, they also did not speak Malay. They don't really know the language, the religion, the customs, all right, and they didn't really hang around with the Muslims as well. Okay, they felt that they were superior, they felt that they were first-class citizens, the Muslims were second-class citizens, they were prejudiced. Okay, and so therefore the local Muslims, they avoided contact with them. Okay, and in the long run, obviously, you know, there's a sense of alienation. You find that if you have any grievances, you cannot go to your MP because the MP would be the enemy. Okay, so eventually, if there are any grievances, it's all bound to, you know, coalesce, and there's going to be an outburst somewhere. Okay, and that will be in terms of a separatist movement. Okay, so therefore the manifestation will be the Pulo movement. So you need to remember the names of all the separatist movements, yeah. So just now in Aceh, all right, there's a GAM movement. Okay, so in Patani, the equivalent will be the Pulo movement. All right, then so therefore we have a separatist movement. So there's evidence that Thai government's efforts to assimilate the minorities, indigenous minorities, in this instance the Thai Muslims, had failed. Okay, now how the government responded to them, right, was that it's the same as, you know, how the Indonesian government responded. So they also responded with like military solution. Okay, so the Thai military campaigns, all right, and at the same time they also tried to have some carrot approach. Okay, so they also try to give some concessions, okay, economic and political reforms. Okay, however, there was limited success. Okay, the political solution had limited success. All right, and so therefore, what happened was that right now this separatist movement is still kind of ongoing. It's a low level conflict. Okay, periodically there will be some bombs going on in some bus stops, and some teachers will get beheaded. The Buddhist teachers will get beheaded, and some monks would, you know, wherever, and then there'll be like what do you call it, retaliation by the Thai government, and just arrest some local Muslims, and all that. So therefore there'll always be some ongoing conflict. Okay, so much so that in 2001, okay, there was increased radicalization of Pulo rebels because they got into contact with the foreign Islamist group. So therefore they became like fundamentalists, right? And then it even led to a state of insurgency being implemented in southern Thailand. Okay, and the imposition of martial law in 2001. So therefore, compared in contrast to the example in Aceh, okay, whereby it was a positive case study where they live happily ever after. There was autonomy being given, okay, and the GAM movement gave up their arms. The Pulau movement is still ongoing right now, even till right now. Okay, so therefore the Pulau movement is a failed case study. Okay, Thai government was not able, okay, to solve this conflict, not able to, even till today. All right, so therefore that's it for this case study. We move on to the next one.